Be here. A couple years ago, I was meeting a friend for lunch in the city I lived at the time. He invited me to come over to his part of the city, a place kind of far from where I lived, and he told me about this great restaurant, and if there's anything I'm good at, it's going to lunch. So I went and met this guy for lunch, and when I got there, it's pretty obvious that this was a good place because the parking lot was completely full. In fact, I was trying to find a place to park kind of in the adjacent lots. And as I came around the side of this restaurant, I noticed next to it a lot that was fairly empty, and so I was able to find a parking space. It was the parking lot of a church. And it was interesting. This was not like a Sunday or anything, but the building looked like most churches. It had a little steeple and kind of a little stained glass thing going on, typical stuff. But what I saw in front was not the typical sign that you would see in front of a church. Instead, what I saw was a for sale sign. And it looked like a nice building. It was in good shape. But rather than having the name of the church, it had the name of a realtor and how you could get in touch with them to find out about possibly buying this building. And it stuck with me as I kind of walked into the restaurant. And so as I was sitting down and kind of catching up with my friend and reporting in on what was happening in our lives here and what was going on in his and so on, I asked him, "Hey man, that church next door, just curious, what's the story there?" And he was familiar with it. Sometimes churches, they outgrow buildings, as God's continuing to bless what's happening at Imprint. Hopefully this will be a facility, a space that will serve the church well for a long time. But you never know down the road. I've been in ministry now for almost 20 years, and the two previous churches I served went through significant relocations and know kind of the ins and outs of what that experience can be like. So I just wondered, maybe that's the story with this place. Maybe God was doing such exciting things and people were getting connected that it got to the point where they had to move on, or maybe it sold for less exciting reasons. And as my friend told me this story, it confirmed my worst fears, that this was quite actually an old church, he said. It had been around for a while, and for a long time had done very well. In fact, it was one of the strongest churches really in that area, but over the last few decades, it had begun to decline. And he told me the story. He says slowly, of course, the number of people in the room got smaller and smaller and smaller, and no new people were coming in. And of course, as that happens, naturally, people begin to age, and it got older and older until there were just a few that were left. And then that small little group of people made the horrifically difficult decision to close their doors. And they voted to sell the building, dissolve the church, and all find other places to get connected. And it stuck with me. I don't remember anything else about that conversation. But still, several years later, I still remember him recounting to me kind of the gradual decline of this place. And the whole rest of the lunch, it's all I could think about. The whole drive back over to my side of town, that's all I could think about. I thought about the fact that there once was a church, there was a time that was bustling, when the classrooms were just packed with kids and the seats packed with people and the auditorium was filled with music. There was a time when the sermons were inspiring and people looked forward to being there, when the church was growing and lives were changing. And I couldn't help but imagine. I imagined the dedication service that building had had. That first Sunday, when all those people, many of whom I'm sure had sacrificed and worked and prayed to be part of what God was doing there, that first Sunday when they opened those doors and they walked in and they sat down in the new chairs for the very first time, and the thrill, if you've been part of something like that, many of you have been part of launching Imprint here, the thrill, the rush of feeling as though you're part of something that God is doing, something exciting, something. There had to have been that Sunday in that place when everything was new and exciting. But now, it was closed and for sale. And it disturbed me. It disturbed me so much that I started to do a little bit more research. And what I found bothered me even more. Many of you have heard these numbers or know about some of the reality of this, but just shocked to discover, according to research, 3,500 churches close per year. Think about that. That means almost 10 churches a day vote to close. They fold up. Studies indicate that of the roughly 400,000 churches that are in the United States, 80% of them are either stagnant in terms of new people getting connected, or they're actually declining. 80%, 4 out of 5 in that place. And the question has to be, Why? Why? Has God lost his mojo? Right? His Spirit's no longer doing dynamic things in our world? Certainly that's not true. You guys being a case in point. Was there some big moral failure? Or that happens more often than not, but it wasn't the case, of course, in this setting. Frankly, it wasn't the case in the church that I grew up attending, which, as much as we hated to admit it, would have fallen into that 80%. It was, at very best, sort of flat, possibly even declining slowly. And looking back, as I thought about that circumstance, I know why it was flat. I know why it was declining. It's because people had forgotten. People had forgotten why they were there, why they even existed. They had forgotten that the church ultimately was not there for them. The church was there for this world. And they stopped reaching. And slowly, I saw it happen at my church. I struggle with it in my own heart. They stopped their passion and concern and drive to be aware of their neighbors and their coworkers and their family members and their friends who didn't know who Jesus was. And slowly, they became this little holy huddle, this closed community where new people might come in, but when they did, when they were rarely, they were inspected. You know? Do they fit here? Do they struggle in ways we're comfortable with? People would talk about the need to reach people for Jesus, but it never actually happened. I mean, isn't that what we pay the pastor for, right? So they never told anyone else about what God was doing in their lives. They never told anyone about God's hope and his healing. They never invited anyone, partly because the experience would not have been a good one, but partly because they were pretty much caught up in their own world, somewhat oblivious to the hurts and the needs of all those people. They forgot. They forgot. It's easy to forget. It's lethal. I have many friends who are church planners, just like Darren. And it's cool to, through Facebook or email or sometimes phone calls, hear from these friends in different parts of the country who are part of church plants. Is very similar to what's happening here at Imprint. And they don't start churches because there just aren't enough churches in our world, right? Because there's a lot of churches. They start churches because they realize that there are some people in their community who are not being reached by the churches that are there. For some reason, for whatever the story might be, they've not found that place where God's truth, where his incredible invitation has been presented in a way that they can understand and connect with. They understand that they want to do something unique, or believe that God's calling them to do something unique, something that will invite people who are far from God to come back home. But I've seen it in my ministry. I've seen it in my heart. And it's sort of the challenge on the coattails of this series, renewing your passion for these values of gospel, gratitude, and generosity here at Imprint. It's easy to forget. It's easy to forget that the church isn't about us. It's easy to forget that it's about Jennifer, who's my neighbor, single mom, with two kind of late elementary, early junior high age kids, who, in my conversations with her, does not show any indication that she has a relationship with Jesus. It's about Bob and Jackie, whose daughter plays on the same soccer team as one of mine, but doesn't know that true success is not measured by the price tag of the vehicle that they drove to the game, or the impressiveness of the vacations that they may be able to take, or the success of the company that they're working to build. It's not about us. It's not about our music preferences or our entertainment. It's about them. Because we have good news. It's what that word gospel that is at the core of the identity of this place. It's what that word means. It's not the style of music at a church. It means good news, this word gospel. And it is good news that new life is possible. A new life free from the control of destructive habits, free from the chasing empty promises that never ultimately satisfy. This good news that we, ordinary broken human beings, can live an entirely new kind of life, filled with power and hope in this world and in the world to come. That we can have an authentic relationship with the knowable God of the universe, who's not some remote deity who we have to sacrifice to or be afraid of, but who invites us into his family to live as one of his kids. Hope that no matter how dark things may get, we are never alone. Hope that no matter how wounded we may be, there is always healing. Hope that no matter how great the need, there is always help. This is good news, not just for those of us that are on the inside, but for the people that are all around us, who are shopping right now across the street, and who will drive by this place and every one of our homes and workplaces every day. We've all been there one way or another. We discovered that there is good news, those of us that are followers of Jesus. But, from the sounds of things, 4 out of 5 churches in America have forgotten that. They think the church, I believe, they think the church is here for us. But I believe they're wrong. The church isn't here for us. The church is here for the world. There's this amazing story that I want to share with you this morning. It comes out of the Old Testament. I never heard this story growing up in Sunday school. And I did the flannel graph thing like most good kids of my generation, right? For those of you who don't know what flannel graph, it's kind of if Velcro and PowerPoint had a baby. That's what flannel graph is, okay? And the story, I can't imagine little figures in this story. That's partly why they probably didn't tell it. But here's what it is. It's in the Old Testament book of Kings, okay? Some of you will not recover from that love child image of Velcro and PowerPoint, but it's all right. Stick with me. This is a story that I want to just walk through. Maybe you're familiar with it. I think it's the story that many churches need to hear, and you might wonder why at first. It's in the Old Testament book of 2 Kings. And let me just set up the situation here. This is after the people of God, the nation of Israel, has divided. This is after David, after Solomon. A few generations later, the people of God, this nation, divides into 2. There's a northern kingdom that's known as Samaria. There's a southern kingdom that's known as Judah. And they not only fighting with each other, but they're fighting with all the other countries around. Frankly, much of their story, they're fighting with God. And in this story, the northern kingdom is under attack by one of those countries that surrounds them. And of course, God would send prophets to try to encourage the kings to follow God and to obey what he was calling them to do. He promised to be their deliverer if they would obey him. But of course, they thought they would take care of things in their own way. And so Samaria, the northern kingdom, and specifically the capital city of Samaria, it's under attack. And this invading nation, rather than having their soldiers slaughtered by trying to storm the city walls, they take what was the traditional approach in that day. They laid siege to the city. They would starve them out. That's the plan. And so the king decides to starve them out. He lays siege. And here's where we pick up to the story. And this is a little gross, so I think all the kids have gone to the other room. We're just going to tell this story real quick here. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 25, I'll start. It says, "There was a great famine in the city because they were being starved out by this enemy army. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. Get this. Things are so bad that they're selling donkeys' heads for 2 pounds of silver. It's a lot of money, hundreds of dollars. And you all need to know this word seed pod here. I don't pretend to be some sort of Hebrew expert, but the seed pod literally means dove's dung, okay? That's what it is. So they're so hungry. This is kind of the friendly translation. They're so hungry that they're paying good money, they're eating dove dung to stay alive. They're so desperate for something to eat. This is not good. Food is very scarce, okay? But listen to this. It gets worse. Some of you have read ahead. Verse 26. "As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried to him, 'Help me, my lord and king.' The king replied, 'If the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor? From the wine press?'" Kind of a little kingly sarcasm there. "What do you want me to do for you? You think I got food in my place? I don't have food either." But listen to what happens. Verse 28. Then he asked her, "What's the matter?" She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son.' So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, 'Give up your son so we may eat him.' But she had hidden him." And how dark is that? How desperate is that? Doesn't get any worse. And I don't need to say any more. I mean, this is bad. This is bad. And I'll jump down several verses, down to the beginning of the next chapter, chapter 7, verse 3. Listen to what it says. Things are this bad in the city. We meet these 4 characters that kind of live out by the gate. "Now there were 4 men," verse 3 says, 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we'll die. And if we stay here, we'll die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans. That was the name of the peoples, the Arameans that were attacking. Let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die. Sort of a profound realization there, right? They've got a pretty impressive plan. So basically, these guys say, we are in the epitome of a no-win situation here, okay? So we can sit here and keep eating bird poop until we die, or we can roll the dice and see what happens. Go for broke. Just take our chances, see what comes up. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? They're going to kill us. But we're going to die anyway, so we might as well give it a shot, right? So that's exactly what they do. Verse 6. Verse 5. At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. An incredible story. And you read story after story of this, of how God stepped in, how he intervened. And in this story, the people in the city don't even realize it. They don't even realize that God has already answered their prayers. He has already intervened. He has already brought deliverance. They're sitting in the city eating dove dung when God has actually fought the battle for them. I've been known to do these kinds of foolish things in my life as well. But that's for another talk. So look what the lepers do. Look what they do. In verse 8, the men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, So you see what they're doing here. I don't want to go on yet. Let me stop there for a second. They're stockpiling this stuff. This is Powerball day, right, for them, right? They have hit the jackpot. And what are they doing? They're doing probably what most of us would do with that initial impulse. They are grabbing onto it for themselves, right? How hungry had they to have been? How hungry must they have been? So they're just shoving this stuff in their mouth to make themselves sick. And then they realize, wait a second, I don't want to lose this, so I'm going to keep it for later. That's what they're doing in verse 8. But then, all of a sudden in verse 9, a moment of conscience strikes one of these guys. Look at what it says. Verse 9. Then they said to each other, "What we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let us go at once and report this to the royal palace." So that's exactly what they do. They run back, they tell the king, and as you read through the rest of the chapter, the people run out and feast like they have never eaten before. Now, I heard this story, I never heard this story, I should say, growing up, but it's a great story, isn't it? I mean, all sorts of things to be learned here. God provides for his people in their time of need, even when they don't really realize it. He miraculously steps in, and he delivers them. And I think this story is one that most churches, including the church that I grew up in, need to hear. Because truthfully, let's be honest, a lot of churches are stuck in verse 8 in this story. They're stuck in verse 8 because they've discovered that the life they're living was taking them nowhere. The cycle of getting up and going to work and coming home and going to bed and then getting up the next day again and doing the exact same thing over and over and over until finally retirement comes for a couple of years and then we die. They realize that this kind of empty cycle is leading them nowhere. And they took risks to become followers of Jesus, trusting God to give them new life in this world and in the one to come. And they found out that he could be trusted. that while they were suffering from a sort of spiritual starvation, the God of the universe intervened and supernaturally laid a feast before them. He provided all they could ever want to satisfy their souls. Most of the people in most churches have discovered that, but sometimes we get stuck there. We get stuck there. This is what I experienced growing up as a follower of Jesus in my church in Western Pennsylvania. We start hoarding it for ourselves. We start talking about it, celebrating it, singing songs about it, thanking God when He actually steps in and does things that we ask Him to do, but pretty much keeping it to ourselves, for ourselves. We were like the lepers who are stuffing ourselves full of God's grace in this story, filling ourselves with God's blessings like we'd never seen, and never even thinking to go back to the city and let everybody else know what's available. Just kind of forget about them, to keep it all for ourselves. Never told anyone about this good news that we discovered. And it's a shame, because the truth is, we're all the same. We have coworkers, we have friends whose marriages are a wreck, who need God's guidance to build a healthy family. All of us, we live next to people who are killing themselves trying to find something that will satisfy their soul, working like crazy. These people are all around, but there's this tremendous impulse to keep it for ourselves, to just keep it for ourselves while others starve. And if you do that long enough, slowly, gradually, I believe, because I've seen it, a church begins to die. And even eventually, it's one more church with a for sale sign in the front. So let me ask you, in your world, who do you know that is starving and doesn't even realize that a feast has been laid before them? Who do you know that is struggling to figure out what life is all about, not realizing that the God of the universe has laid before them blessings beyond their wildest imagination to bring them into a new kind of life? I mean, I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer here or something. Every party needs a pooper, that's why me invited you. That's not why I'm here today. I'm here because even in this wonderful season when God is working at Imprint, as you've just celebrated this first year birthday as a distinct and unique church, I think it's critical to always remind ourselves of how easy and dangerous it is to slip into this rut. Because when a church first starts, everybody has to pitch in. Everybody has to be passionate. Everyone has to play a part. But as things begin to happen and systems begin to get into place and the sort of volunteers begin to emerge, it can be easy to lose some of that pioneering passion that so marks a church plant as it's getting off the ground. It's like the famous sophomore slump. You've heard of that? It's an artist who comes out with their debut album only to come out with their next album and it's horrible, right? Because they put all their best songs in the first one. And they have been so busy enjoying their newfound fame, they have no time to creatively work on what the next songs are going to be. Or, how many sequels have been made that should never have been made, right? How many? How many Friday the 13ths, right? We're kind of coming off take your pick. I was kind of trolling the web for great stories of lousy sequels, and there was a lot to choose from, right? Think about that. Authors, they come out with a wonderful first book, and their second one is horrible. Athletes who have breakout rookie seasons, only to come back the following year and not be able to find their way down the field. Companies who launch with these wonderful products, but can't come up with anything else afterwards, and become a flash in the pan. Churches who start out with thrilling energy and excitement, believing that God has uniquely crafted them to serve and reach a certain people in their community, to do something unique and eternally significant in their world, only to begin to just enjoy the success and to just bask in the good things, to feast on the food that God has laid before them, while others around starve. I know that's the farthest thing from what's happening here at Imprint, but as Darren had asked me to speak and he said, talk about whatever you want, as I prayed about this, I thought, this may be what we all need to hear. Because it's what I need to hear. I need to be reminded that instead of feasting on all these things that God has given me, His grace, His power, His promises, I know it's so easy to just pig out while everybody around me starves. Those of us who are Jesus followers in this room, we have discovered that the enemy has been defeated. That the walls that so many people have erected to protect themselves are not necessary because God is not coming to get them. At least not in the way they think. He's calling them to come out of hiding, to come out of their scared huddle, scared of what's going to happen in their lives, and enjoy the protection and blessing that He has for them. We've discovered what life is really about, that we're not going to be around forever. And we don't want to reach the end of our lives and have the typical stuff to show for it. A nice house, a closet full of outdated clothes, maybe a little portfolio to pass on to the kids. We've realized there's more to this life than that. So the question is, in the final analysis, what is life supposed to be about? In the final analysis, what's the church really about? It's about people. From cover to cover, the Bible teaches that the ultimate treasure in the whole universe, God's ultimate priority in this world, is to invite as many people as He possibly can into His family through Jesus, His Son. Think about it. When Jesus was asked why He had come, if He had to boil it down, He said it a number of different ways. But one of the famous ways He said it was, listen to me now, He said, I came to seek and save that which was lost. That's why I came. Remember in His final commission, kind of His final marching orders, just before He ascended to the Father, He says, you guys go for it. Get out of your holy huddles, take this message of the cross, and get it out there. Go where? He says, into the whole world. Go for broke. Go for the whole world. Don't just settle with your community. Go for the world. And don't play it safe. Risk it all for the sake of my mission, He says. Try to lead people to faith, and when you do, teach them to live this new kind of life that I've modeled for you, that I've commanded you to live. See, when that light bulb goes on in the mind of a person or in the mind of a church, that's when things begin to happen, I think. An individual or a church says, no more playing safe. I will take risks. So I'm going to serve selflessly. I'm going to give generously. I'm going to pray passionately. I'm going to share authentically about what God's doing in my life. And I'm not going to simply go through the religious motions and show up here every week. I am going to live with a passion and intensity, believing there is more to this world than what I can see. That this world needs this good news. So I wonder, what risks do you need to take? Because my bet is, you're like me. You know people around you who don't know who Jesus is. The guy who cuts my hair, his name's Dominic. He's as far from God as anyone, really. And I prefer to get my hair cut by people who don't know Jesus. Sometimes they're more fashionable, frankly. So I want them, because I get 30 minutes every other month, right? Locked audience. And I'm not going to sit there and preach at them. I don't bring my notes in a PowerPoint on the mirror. But I want to steer that conversation to the ways I see God working in my marriage, to how my kids are discovering faith and overcoming things through God's power. I want to tell them about the cool things that churches like Imprint, like North Shore are doing to make a real practical difference in our world in Jesus' name. I want to have those conversations with him because I don't know who else is having those conversations in his life. And my sense from a few conversations with him down these lines is he basically thinks what most people think. If he's good enough, which translates maybe not as good as Mother Teresa, but not as bad as Osama bin Laden, right? Then he'll go to heaven if there is one. But if that's he doesn't understand grace at all. And I don't preach at him, but I try to steer that conversation just to share what I see God doing in my life. You look at the stories where Jesus sends someone to tell others about him. His instruction is often this: go tell them what I'm doing in your life. Think about it. The man who had demon possession in the district of the Gerasenes. You think about the woman at the well that Jesus interacted with. His instruction, not go tell them what they're doing wrong, not go tell them how stupid they are for believing what they believe. Go tell them what I've done for you. The man who'd possessed by demons, the woman at the well, on and on and on. They didn't have some clever formula on how to share their faith. They simply told other people what Jesus was doing in their lives. And they invited people to see for themselves. And people responded. They came looking for him. Friends, you don't have to have the answer to every question. You don't have to know the Bible backward and forward. All you need is to tell the story of what Jesus is doing in your life. Then invite them to see it for themselves. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody says no. Somebody says, I don't want to hang out with you. I mean, let's be honest. That's as close to martyrdom as any of us are ever going to get. Because the goal isn't for you to become some kind of expert on all this stuff. It's for you to have a heart like Jesus has that drives us to care and to love and to serve in his name. Because that's why he came, to seek and save the lost. To remember what we're going to remember in just a few moments at these stations up here in the front, those of us that are followers of Jesus, in communion, to take that bread, to dip it in that juice, and to eat that bread. Remind us of the sacrifice that was made so we, broken people like me, could have a new kind of life. I mean, think about this. Even in the final moments of his life, as Jesus is being pounded to a cross, and these are not nice guys who are doing this. They're not doing this gently. They're just taking out spikes and sledgehammers and going to work on his hands and feet. And here's Jesus. Do you remember what he says? I mean, he knows they're so far from the love of God, so far from the Father. Do you remember what he says? He says, Father, forgive these guys. They don't even know what they're doing. Don't charge it to their account, Father. Please don't. Then just a few minutes later, when he's just in his final moments of life, you remember that scene where that criminal's hanging next to him, and he says to Jesus, do you have any love left in your heart for someone like me? I mean, how about a scoundrel like me? And what does Jesus do? What's he say? Today, you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus just overflowing with love for the lost, within minutes of his final breath even. So friends, that's my question. What will keep Imprint Church from becoming like 4 out of 5 churches in our world? It means developing the same passion in our heart. Because I do believe that God put Imprint here for a reason. Not just because the driving school needed a tenant or we all had too much free time on a Sunday morning. It's so that the community will encounter the life-transforming, eternity-changing love of Jesus Christ through this church. That's my prayer for you. So who do you know that needs to know? And what risk do you need to take? So here's what we're going to do. A number of different ways you can respond. As I mentioned, those that are followers of Jesus, feel free to make your way up to these tables and eat. Just take the bread, dip it into the juice, and eat it there. Either in that moment or take it back to your seat. We're going to sing a few songs where you have a chance to respond. And of course, for those, by the way, who have gluten issues, there's some gluten-free over here on the side. You have a chance at those stations, there's a place you can drop some offering, because part of that risk is trusting God to live generously and not simply trying to feather our own nest or make sure we have what we need first. It's to live selflessly and sacrificially for the sake of others, even financially. Back there, many of you, maybe you want to pray with someone. Maybe, frankly, some of you are here and you need to come out of the city and enjoy the feast. Then you may need some people to pray with you and to talk about that, or there's some other struggle that you need to know that you have other friends that are standing with you. You saw there's a guest card on the way in that you can also mark, and you can drop those off in those front boxes as well. There's a lot of different ways you can respond, but what we're going to do right now is the band's going to come up, and they're going to lead us in some songs. As we take communion, make our giving, drop off our cards, maybe seek prayer, or just sing, just to respond and say, God, keep that passion hot in my heart. So would you bow your head with me? Let's pray and ask for God's help with this. Lord, our inclination is to just keep for ourselves. I get the lepers in verse 8. I get it. But Father, I believe you're calling us to take chances for your sake. And I believe for Imprint to have the impact that you're calling it to have, Lord, that will require every person that's part of this church saying, Lord, I will resist that urge to just keep it for myself. But I will live with the kind of passion that you had, where you were willing to risk everything for the sake of those who needed to know. God, I thank you for what you're doing in this church, but I pray, Lord, it is only the beginning of what you have in mind. And I ask this all in the name of Jesus himself. Amen.